the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, where we discuss all things crypto related. Your host, Kieran Ryan.
The US is ramping up pressure on South Africa over its ties to Russia, China, and Iran, and its accusations of genocide against Israel brought before the International Court of Justice in 2023. Despite efforts to smooth out these wrinkles, the US continues to apply pressure on South Africa, leading to fears this might escalate into something more serious, such as sanctions against specific ANC officials and what many consider to be the nuclear option, placing restrictions on South Africa's access to SWIFT, the international messaging system used by banks. Someone who's been keeping an eye on this is Fadil Motti, CEO and founder of payments company and crypto service provider 88. Hi, Fadil. It's good to talk to you again. Now, we spoke some time ago about the likelihood of South Africa being cut off from the international payment system, SWIFT, if the US keeps applying the kind of pressure we've seen during the last year. You said at the time it was more likely we would see sanctions against individual politicians rather than the whole country. Do you see the pressure on South Africa increasing from the US, and how do you think this might end?
Hey, Kieran. Thanks for having me on again. It's always great to be here. So yes, we are seeing increased pressure. Revoking Naledi Pandor's visa is a strong diplomatic signal. It does suggest a shift towards personal targeted pressure, and that's usually how it starts. It's not about sanctioning the country right away. It looks more like political isolation, weakening the international positioning of South Africa. The US is signaling discomfort with South Africa's global alignment, particularly with regards to Russia, China, and even the Gaza issue. And the financial world watches these signs very closely. So a SWIFT ban or a visa ban today could lead to asset freezes or even blocked funds or blocked access tomorrow. Historically, this is how sanctions are sequenced. First, they diplomatic, targeted at politicians, then financial. But what I can say is that South Africa is resilient. This is also a moment to build stronger bridges with our allies in the East and create redundancy in our financial infrastructure. In short, we do expect more noise, likely against individuals and certain sectors, but the smart move is to prepare, not panic.
Okay, so let's just talk about that, the preparation that might be required. There are alternatives to SWIFT, such as the Chinese CIPS. It stands for Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. Russia's got its own system. It's called SPFS. So if South Africa does get cut off from SWIFT, can we rely on these alternatives to fill the gap?
It seems like we already are, quietly in the background. SIPS is gaining traction. One of South Africa's major banks has already integrated it for trade with China. And these alternatives are real. They're designed to bypass US-dominated rails. They may be a bit slower and more regional for now, but their adoption is growing, especially among the BRICS nations. And South African banks are proactively exploring this, like we've recently seen. So that tells you it's not a theoretical exercise. It's a defensive infrastructure play. Plus, big players like MasterCard are building stablecoin compatible backend rails. And I think the next evolution may not just be SIPS versus SWIFT. It may be blockchain versus both. The smarter institutions aren't waiting to be cut off. They're obviously diversifying their flow paths today in order to remain consistent and to remain in business, I guess.
It's interesting that you mentioned this could become a contest between SWIFT and blockchain, stablecoins in particular. And we've already seen quite a lot happening just in the last year. It should be mentioned that there are a number of different ways to bypass the banking system. Stablecoins being one. Bitcoin Lightning Network provides near instant 24/7 transactional capability at very low costs. You've got Wise, you've got RippleNet, Revolut, PayPal, and others. Banks and SWIFT, they're beginning to face competition, are they not?
Absolutely. But it's not a crypto versus banks war. I think, in my view, it's a convergence. Banks are partnering with fintechs because they know what's coming. Stablecoins, Bitcoin Lightning, and platforms like RippleNet or Wise offer near instant, low-cost, 24/7 settlements. It's not theory, it's being used today. So traditional banking rails were not built for speed or any transparency or global 24/7 use. The new rails are. However, fintechs are being pulled into the regulatory fold, like we've recently seen over this year, especially. So they're not escaping the system. They're actually becoming part of it. At 88, we see this firsthand. Banks are now open to collaboration, especially with stablecoins and infrastructure, because fintechs like us bring innovation wrapped in compliance. And with more regulation, I think the future is hybrid. Regulated fintechs operating across decentralized and traditional rails are going to become more apparent, and banks are going to be part of the fold.
Right. Okay, let's talk about the year that's just passed, 2025. Quite a fascinating year. People were a bit disappointed with the performance of Bitcoin, that it dropped, and it seems to have broken its traditional 4-year cycle. Normally this time of year, it's in a bull market. What stood out for you in the crypto space in 2025?
Yeah, I agree. The market was volatile. To me, the standout was maturity. So, regulation, infrastructure, and partnerships that felt impossible 2 years ago are now happening very fast. I think what matters is what builders and institutions did in 2025, which is that convergence that we spoke about. FSC has registered a lot more crypto asset service providers. Other licensing frameworks have evolved and gone into draft stage. Banks are working with stablecoin rails. And we saw a lot of real doors open. Conversation with banks, other PSPs, and mobile money operators. And the regulators have taken a less hostile approach. It was a lot more constructive. I think crypto is no longer the outsider. It's the infrastructure behind the new financial services. Also, we saw massive growth in tokenized assets, yield-bearing stablecoins, and Sharia-compliant fintech as well. That shift toward real-world utility is the headline of 2025.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the banks. It's quite clear that the banks are starting to come on board. We've seen quite a few partnerships. There's the partnership between Absa and Ripple. FNB has done a deal with MasterCard for cross-border payments. They don't mention it, but there is stablecoin rails in the background there that is making this possible. There's this very thing that you've been talking about, this near instantaneous ability to transact in a very transparent way. Are you seeing more and more banks starting to warm to blockchain and to crypto generally?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're going to see a lot more of it in 2026 with some of the big banking players like we've seen already come up and offer crypto as part of their offering to their customers. Maybe less so in the way fintechs are already offering it, but that offering will already be there. And I think in the background, there's a lot of infrastructure plays that the banks are not ignoring. So they're becoming part of the infrastructure, like we've seen with MasterCard, that is giving them a better offering in the market and being more competitive. So what can we expect? More convergence, less theory, more real use cases. And I think 2026 will be about stablecoin infrastructure, embedded finance, and potentially maybe even programmable payments becoming normal.
All right. What about 2026? What do you think we should be looking out for next year?
I think we'll see more regulated banks offering access to crypto-based rails. Cross-border payments will accelerate via non-SWIFT alternatives like what we have with stablecoins. Stronger regulation around that, hopefully something from the SARB. Yield-bearing stablecoins and tokenized saving products will emerge in regulated wrappers. And crypto won't be the lead narrative. It will be embedded in everyday fintech tools or B2B flows and treasury systems. For South Africa, we'll likely see further crypto regulation clarity. And I think our goal is to sit right at the intersection of value compliance and the user experience as well.
Right. So when you talk about South Africa getting more regulatory clarity, where would you like to see that clarity? Is this in terms of exchange control regulation specifically, or are there some other areas that are also a little bit gray at the moment?
I think broadly speaking, what we'd like to see is SARB-backed infrastructure experiments. And I think that's quite important for the industry as a whole. that SAR become a common player within the space, and find a way to regulate it through that, instead of just trying to bring in some sort of words into the exchange control ruling that could hinder progress and future innovation. So I think it's quite important that we see the regulators being a player within the space. I think they have definitely taken a couple steps forward when it comes to BankServe being formed now into Pay Incorporated, and new regulation for fintechs to play within the space. So we're definitely going there. It's just about how and what steps we take to get there in order to foster this innovation.
And I guess one other question I want to ask is, was this a good year for the crypto industry in South Africa? And maybe you can talk about 88 specifically, was activity as good as you expected it to be, or were there some disappointments?
Absolutely. It's been a phenomenal year. Without looking at the market and its volatility, we've seen a lot of adoption. We've seen a lot of customers more eager and interested in the type of services that we offer. We see a keenness around stable coins. So innovation has definitely 10x'd this year. And I think what's been the most important is collaborations, because we as fintechs need to own distribution and the banks need to own product. So that convergence is now becoming more and more important. And I think it's for us at 88, it's all about building tools people actually use.
Fantastic. We are going to leave it there. That was Fadil Moti, CEO and founder of 88. Thanks very much for joining us, Fadil.
Thank you so much, Kiran. Thank you for having me. It's always great to be here.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, hosted by Kieran Ryan. To listen to our other podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates.